Sorry, what were we talking about?
Hello there, and welcome to Office Hours, a live component of the facility where good old Professor Kyle gives you a fancy transition and then allows all of you, my lovely staff, members of the general public, to come in and ask your boy here any old science-y, pop culture-y question. Look, I'm not a scientist. I don't have a PhD, but I do know a little bit about a lot of science-y and pop culture-y stuff. So if you have a comment for me, you can leave it below as we go through a number of topics this week, as we are wont to do on Office Hours. Of course, if you want to continue on this conversation after this live stream is done, it will be back up on the channel. You can go to patreon.com/KyleHill, as my security team is putting in the chat right now, and you can talk with me every day on Discord and get videos early. This week's early video is going to be a new Half-Life Histories. You can get private members-only live streams with me. Not like that. We also do have security in the chat, so if you're being a real bantha poodoo, they'll bantha you. Oh, and when we're going through our topics today, if you really, really, really want me to see something, you can also use Super Chat on YouTube. I'll try my best to get to as many of those as I possibly can while reading all your comments, questions, and reactions. May the 4th be with you. We have Elizabeth Calvert with the 20, showing you how to do this thing. My tiny human Alex's question of the week is, why is there thunder? How does it happen? Well, thunder is the sound that lightning makes, Alex. Lightning is super, super hot. It's like 6 times hotter than the surface of the sun. And when something gets very hot very quickly, it makes the air around it move out of the way very quickly. And when air moves very quickly, it creates a pressure wave. And pressure wave is what hits our eardrums, vibrates them, and then our brain transpons that into electrical signals in our brains, which then gets interpreted by our brains as sound. So thunder is the sound that lightning makes. So see how fun that is? You can do that too, just like Alex did. So, of course, we'll be talking today about the top 10 things, in my estimation, that Star Wars got right and wrong about science through the years. It won't really surprise you that I think Star Wars got a lot of things wrong, but it also got things right, and I came up with a list that I think is totally fair. And then, if there's time, we'll also be getting to some of your comments, corrections, and questions from the latest episode of the facility, where I did a near-perfect Bob Ross impression. But before we get to that, of course, I want to see what everyone is saying in the chat. Noah, thank you. Hello from Germany. The Force Apple says, science, yeah! Katie Trinity Blade says, the coffee cup is very small. No, I'm just very big. The Moon says, there's an absolute zero. Is there a maximum hot? I would recommend a Vsauce video on that. Dakota Dad says, banning people is just, wow. No, I get to do whatever I want here. I don't pay nearly $1 billion for a facility like this and then just let a bunch of yabbies show up. You know what I mean? Running their mouths. Brian Schmidt says, thunder only happens when it's raining. You just got me demonetized. But if I can get demonetized for a Fleetwood, maybe it's worth it. You know, I bet there's a lot of you waiting to see what I determine to be good or bad about Star Wars, because I'm sure Star Wars fans are totally fine with criticizing things. So let's get right to it, shall we? With our first topic. There we go. So coming in at number 10, the first thing, there's going to be 5. There's going to be 5 of each. I picked 5 things that Star Wars got right and 5 things that Star Wars got wrong in some sort of top 10 of importance. And I think the very first one is the galaxy. Now, when we talk about Star Wars, obviously one of the first things to come to mind is the opening lines of all the Star Wars films, I think. A galaxy far, far away, a long, long time ago. And I like what I think Star Wars is getting right about this is the scope and scale of Star Wars. A lot of science fiction stories talk about saving the universe or everything. And the fact of the matter is, the universe is so unimaginably large that saving the entire universe almost makes no sense. And it makes no sense if you really get granular with it too, right? What's the fastest something can travel? the speed of light. Even if something can travel faster than the speed of light, as canonically the Millennium Falcon does, 1.5 past light speed. Ooh, Han Solo, you're so roguish. Even if you can travel 1.5 past light speed, it would still take you, what, 2.5 years to get to the nearest star from Earth's sun? It would take 2.5 years at 1.5 past light speed to get to Alpha Centauri, which is just a little bit more than a parsec away. But we'll get to that in a little bit. So, if any of you noticed my Qui-Gon Jinn here, but by keeping Star Wars to a galactic scale, and I'm sure they didn't do this on purpose, it makes more sense to have a galactic senate, trade routes, Kessel runs, and things like that, because the distances are much smaller. Yes, of course, you're still talking about, 100,000 light years across for something like a Milky Way galaxy. But at least we're not talking about, the diameter of the observable universe, something like 13 or 14 billion light years across. So by keeping it to a galactic scale, Star Wars is making more sense than other sci-fi films would when they're talking about saving the entire universe. Well, there's things in the universe, because everything is so far apart in the universe, entire Star Wars-like civilizations could rise and fall over millions or billions of years, and you would never know it happened because the light would take so long to get to you. So scale is something that I do like about Star Wars. Now, if you were being even more accurate, in my estimation, you would want to make that scale even smaller. That's why I like shows like The Expanse, because with current technology, traveling around the solar system in days or weeks makes sense, and you can still have trade routes and those kind of things. But Star Wars is somewhere in between very realistic and totally not realistic. What do y'all think is the next one? Space is too big. Why square velocities? I don't know. David Meir says, Star Wars is a fantasy series. It doesn't need to get science right. It's a science fiction film. Or science fantasy. It's not fantasy in the same way that Lord of the Rings is fantasy or anything like that. And nerd apologists trying to push out the science from science fiction, I think that's don't excuse lazy writing or anything like that. So let's get on to the next one. Number 9 on my list of Star Wars things that got right and wrong in order of absolute importance to me. Blaster bolts. Now, if blaster bolts are plasma, then there's not that much of a problem. But as we'll get to, most things in Star Wars are depicted and described as something like laser beams. And obviously, if lasers are being shot out of a blaster, those lasers are going to be traveling at the speed of light, about 300,000 kilometers per second. And I bring this up, and you probably thought of this already, but I bring this up because there's an interesting tactical element to having something that shoots at the speed of light. If you are aiming, if you are staying on target, if you are on target with a laser weapon, you can't miss. You literally can't miss. It's different than something like a rifle or, say, a sniper rifle. You have to lead a target if it's moving because the bullet takes some time to travel before it meets the target. Or any other projectile that has some speed like that. You need to adjust for the movement of the target or where the target is or conditions and something like that. But an empty space without air, without a large gravitational tug or something like that, a laser weapon, if it was on a target... Lord Matty says, what if your aim is bad, though? Well, yeah. But if you're pointing at a target and your reticle is on the target and you pull that trigger because the thing is traveling at the speed of light, there is literally no possible way the target could get out of the way. If you can see the target... Now, that's different if you're talking about, firing a laser at something, a light second away or a light hour away, large-scale space battle, turret, ballista fire, something like that, because then a spaceship could move. But if you can see the target, that means it's within a light second minimum of you. So there'd be no possible way for a target to move out of the way. So when you have something like... So when you have Darth Vader in the trench run, I have you now. If you're in the target and you pull the trigger, you are not missing. So blaster bolt speed is something that I've always... I don't have a problem really with any of these things because I really don't care, but it's something to notice and be interested in if you're a total geek like me. John C. Newman says, but what if the Star Wars galaxy takes place in a hyperspace universe? Yeah, I don't know what that means. Simply Dawes says, if a Millennium Falcon is moving at 1.5 past light speed, would a laser beam ever reach it? Loaded question, because if the speed of light wasn't an actual limit, then no, but it is, and so nothing with mass can travel that fast, and so it wouldn't travel that fast, and then yes. Stefan says, but blasters are not lasers. I know, I said if they were lasers. Now, number 8 on my list of things, it's something that Star Wars gets pretty right about science. The ease of making clones. Now, there's a clone army in Star Wars. There's also an attack of said clones. And maybe you don't know, but the only thing keeping us from making human clones, and many human clones, is ethics. So I'm not stating whether or not it's good or bad to make a bunch of clone humans, but what I am saying is that we certainly have the technology to do so. Nature has had the technology to do so for a very long time, of course. Identical human twins are clones. Identical... It's a live show. Identical twins are clones, so they have exactly the same DNA. So the only thing, we can now replicate this by taking someone's DNA from a nucleus. Thank you. May the force be with me. Bless me. Thank you. You geeks. So what we do now is to clone a sheep, Dolly the sheep, or any other animal. We take some DNA. Yeah, I just exploded a little bit. If we take some DNA out of a cell, and we take that DNA out of a cell with a really, really tiny syringe, and what we do is we find an egg cell, a cell that can be fertilized, and we take an egg cell and we take out its nuclear material from its nucleus, and then we replace it with the material that we want to make a clone out of. So I could take one of my cells, take the DNA out of the nucleus of it, find an egg cell from a donor, remove its nucleus, put my nuclear DNA material in there, and then get it fertilized, and then have it be birthed by someone or some sort of sci-fi tube apparatus. And there you go, get a human clone. The Chinese scientists are dabbling much more than the rest of the world in human clones, but to say that a clone army is fairly realistic. What's not so realistic, well, on Camino, they grow them from birth, right? And they have an entire learning process. I believe in The Force Awakens, isn't there growth period, like accelerated or something like that? That's not super accurate, but what do you think the next one is? We're moving on to number 7. Andrei says, we can't grow people in a container from 2 cells. No, but we can grow people from 2 cells. In fact, your parents did that. From an egg cell and a sperm cell. And 9 months later, you came out. And then, I'm going to guess 27 years later, you commented on my video. Isn't the universe amazing? So, number 7 on my list of things that Star Wars gets right and wrong, of course, we gotta mention single-biome planets. Now, if you've ever been on a planet, which I think you have, if a planet has an atmosphere, and water and life, there is presumably going to be cycles in place that allow that life to be there, whether that be a water cycle or gas cycles, those kind of things. And that doesn't really lend itself to an entire planet being a single kind of environment. Now, when I say biome, I mean it's an ecosystem in which animals exist. Everything in that ecosystem. And so to have a planet like Tatooine be completely desert, or to have a forest moon of Endor be completely forest, to have no geologic events that change its surface, most notably to have an entire planet be a volcanic planet like Mustafar, that's more likely. But because nothing lives there. But if stuff lives there, it implies there are different processes going on that make the likelihood of it being a single biome planet very low. So having an entire and multiple desert planets like Jakku or whatever it's called, unlikely. Unlikely if life is on it. Did life originate on Tatooine? Good question. Whatever your face is. Maybe life was brought there. But it seems like there's indigenous life, right? Commander Omegon with the 21 euros says Star Wars is fantasy, Kyle, with the hero's journey versus good and evil, but it is also science fiction. For the obvious, so it's both. YouTube is not really making it easy for the super chat for me to send. Hey, Kyle, love the show. Hey. Yeah, no, of course. Star Wars is less science fiction than something like The Expanse or something like Star Trek. But because you're all super geeks and you're watching me right now, and this is my job, we're going to talk about a little bit of science in it because people always ask, you always wonder. You know, it's fine. And it gets a lot of people learning about different topics in Star Wars, science fiction, Star Trek. It gets people and young kids and young people excited about learning these things in real life. And I think there's value in exploring some of these very fiction-y fantasy ideas. I mean, we just had an interview with Miguel Alcubierre, the guy who popularized and came up with the first warp drive. And what did he say in our interview? You can go watch it back on the channel. He said, you know, I asked him what inspired you to think about this. He's like, I love Star Trek. So there is some value here to evaluating what we love critically and geekily. And I won't hear otherwise. Number 5 on something that I think Star Wars gets very right about science is ship shape. Now, when you don't have an atmosphere, Charlie Spur with the 20 says, I'm an identical twin. I call my twin spare parts. That's fun. Sawyer Bird with the 10 says, what's your favorite Star Wars movie and why? Return of the Jedi holds a special place in my heart because when I was living overseas in the late 90s, it's one of the only VHS tapes that I had, and they didn't have DVDs over there yet. So I watched Return of the Jedi to the point where I could say every single line of dialogue. I don't think it's the best Star Wars movie, but it holds a special place in my heart because I've seen it so many times. I don't really like watching Empire Strikes Back because it's sad. So yeah, I'll go with Return of the Jedi. But one thing that I do think science gets right about, Star Wars gets right about science, it's a live show, is ship shape. When there is no atmosphere, when none of these rebel ships are going to be entering an atmosphere where there's drag, that a drag force increases with the square of the velocity. You can get, when ships are going really fast and entering an atmosphere, the drag force is insane. So if you're not doing that, you're not entering an atmosphere, then you can have any old fragile, weird ship shape that you want. Really. Aside from how your ship is accelerating and stuff, which will put stresses on it, but if you're just floating through space, you can have, your ship can literally be any shape and be equally valid aerodynamically because there is no arrow through which to be dynamic. So to have these evocative, interesting shapes in Star Wars, totally valid. And then it also does make sense why TIE fighters and X-Wings have wings in the way that they do. If they do enter atmospheres from time to time, then that would make sense, right? So to have weird ship shapes in space, totally fine. Seal of approval. In fact, make them weirder. Make them like Borg cubes. Oh, wait, the Borg already did that. Yeah. Empt T says the big ships never enter the atmosphere, so that makes sense. Notification says, so it's not so much as getting it right, just as not getting it wrong. Well, yeah. It's the logical opposite. David SJ with the 25 says, none of this explains why SETI Alpha 6 exploded and turned SETI Alpha 5 into a wasteland. Oh, wait. I'm going to go ahead and admit that I have no idea what you're talking about, which is why number 5 on the things I think Star Wars gets right and wrong about science is something it gets right. Ion engines. As any geek will tell you without asking, TIE Fighter stands for Twin Ion Engine. And the cool thing is, ion engines are actually a thing. So, in the pantheon of space engines, most of the rockets, all of the rockets that you've ever seen in real life or on TV or whatever, have been chemical rockets. In that we take some fuel and we combust that fuel and we throw out the combustion products, and that the conservation of momentum, when we throw the rocket fuel one way as it explodes, it throws our ship other ways, up into space. That's one type. Another type is ion engines. And ions do the exact same thing. All of rocket science is just trying to figure out a really good way of throwing something in the direction opposite to where you want to go. That's all rocket science is. The rest of it is just math. And tweeting about cryptocurrencies, apparently. So ion engines do the exact same thing as chemical rockets. Instead of using chemical fuel, like, they use ions, which are just charged particles. And when I say just charged particles, I'm talking about very, very small amounts of charged gas, like plasma. And this gas is accelerated electromagnetically, if you will, out the back of a rocket at extremely high speed. But you should know, dear viewer, that of course the conservation of momentum doesn't just care about extreme speed, it also cares about mass. Momentum is mass times velocity. And so ion engines only provide a very tiny amount of thrust, because particles, like size of atoms and molecules, even though they're traveling extremely fast, their mass is so tiny that the thrust for the rocket is very small. Well, then, Kyle, why do we use those rockets? Because in a chemical rocket, you have to explode all that fuel all at once. It's hard to stop an explosion. You can quote me on that. But for an ion engine, because you can more or less control the flinging of these tiny particles, you can have a lot of fuel that lasts you for a long time. And so you can accelerate for like months or years. And even though the thrust is very small, if you thrust for a small amount for a long time, you can build up a lot of speed, a lot of velocity. Get up into percentages of the speed of light. And beyond that is kind of a middle ground between the two, which is like fusion or fission rockets, which we don't have yet, but nuclear rockets that would provide a lot of thrust for a long time. Instead of a little thrust for a long time, a lot of thrust for a long time because the fuel is so dang efficient. But all of that is to say this, that ion engines do in fact exist, and I believe the SERT-1, SERT-1 rocket, or vessel, in fact had 2 ion engines, which made it a TIE fighter. Of course, if you wanted a rocket, or you wanted a ship using an engine to go very, very fast and make adjustments quickly and provide a lot, if you want to make a hard adjustment, like very quickly, you need to change that momentum very quickly and with a lot of momentum, right? So an ion engine would probably be the worst engine to have on a small spacecraft fighter. So they got that wrong. But to his credit, George Lucas, at the time when they were filming A New Hope, ion engines were just barely entering into public consciousness, like just for a few years. So to take something, an emerging real technology, and incorporate it, I think is pretty cool and should be recognized. Hamish, with the 5, says, been watching for years and you got me into science, which got me into history, which eventually led me to linguistics and anthropology. Thanks, babe. Hey, babe, you're welcome. I didn't like that. I didn't like how you made me say that. Stedman, 75 with a 10, says, many years ago on a show we won't name, you were asked, quote, would you ever do an episode about how our eyesight would be affected if you had anime eyes? Will you ever make that episode? Love your work. Well, Stedman, thank you for coming here and asking me that question about that show. Yeah, it's the Anime Eyes episode still on my list of things to do. I haven't gotten around to it, but do you know what else is on my list? Number 4. In things that Star Wars gets right and wrong in order of extreme importance to me. Number 4 is lightsabers. Now, if you know anything about me, you know I've made literally over an hour worth of videos about lightsabers. I've talked about every permutation you could possibly think of, from how they operate to could they block bullets, to could they cut Captain America's shield or Wolverine's claws and all this crap. I've talked about lightsabers to the point where I don't really want to talk about them anymore. And do you know why I did talk about them so much? Is because people are, or nerds, are constantly, I'll put it this way. What a lightsaber has been a nerd discussion for almost 50 years now, because they were so ill-defined. Are they lasers? Are they plasma? How do they work? I know in the initial movie it doesn't matter. It's just a fantasy sword. I get that. But to have them for 9 movies and a number of, novels and video games and all that stuff, the reason why we still talk about lightsabers and you still ask me about lightsabers is because there's no good grounding for them. And because of this, I think it's a grand thing that Star Wars got wrong, in that a laser sword would not look like this. You would not see the beam would not stop, the beam would not have a constant cutting edge like this, which is to say that this part wouldn't cut. A laser would only be transmitting energy at the surface that it's impacting from the point at which it's emitted. So it would go out and hit a surface, and at that surface it would start to ablate and dissolve and vaporize material, but that it's a moving pulse, right? So it doesn't stop, it doesn't create a single beam, solid beam like that. And so to lean into and double down on laser swords is fine for a creative thing, but it has created so much confusion in the science fiction nerdery community that I think it's a missed opportunity. You don't, again, of course, you don't have to make everything realistic and sciencey. It's just that it's made my life more full of your questions, which I guess is fine, considering that it's my entire livelihood. We have Scott Hudson with the 20, says, show Kyle, love the hay. I've been watching for quite a long time and adore your content, but this message is a simple thank you. Helping me discover I have ASD has helped me understand myself more than ever. Thank you. You know what, Scott? When I talked about my experience, my only hope in the world was that I could help anyone get the help or advice or insight that they may want. So if you understand yourself better and it helps you form some more context in your life, thank you. That's very humbling. Squirrel Noob with the $69 donation and just says nice. Squirrel Noob. Nice. Next on the list of things that I think Star Wars gets very right or very wrong is something that I think it gets very right. This is number 3. Aliens look weird. Now, if aliens exist, which mathematically they have a good chance of doing, if aliens exist, then they're probably not going to look like us at all. Not even close. Because everything, if it's going to develop on a planet, it's probably going to follow some process like evolution by natural selection. And if that's the case, it's going to have life on a different planet will have different environmental pressures and different constituents and different geological features and nutrients and blah, 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 food webs and all that stuff. And once the selective pressures start changing, that's what creates different looking creatures. So what if there was creatures evolving in the dense clouds of Venus or something like that? Well, then they have a very little chance of having 2 legs and a face. A glorious face. And hair. And eyebrow. What I'm saying is, in a lot of in most science fiction, I'd say, you have the classic bipedal human-looking humanoid alien. And that's just very unlikely to be the case in the galaxy, in the universe, if life exists. So for Star Wars to make very weird-looking aliens the norm with Jabba the Hutt and associated creatures, that is a creative choice that does make sense. And I know having humanoid aliens is crab people, and humanoid aliens is a constraint of budget, right? And special effects, you know, something that early TOS, Star Trek, rather, went through. And that's fine. I'm just saying, you should know the likelihood of finding a bikini-laden green alien lady out somewhere in the galaxy is, I'd say, 0. Cindio says, do you know that aliens smoke heroin? I didn't. Santiago Ardilla with a COP 20,000. I'm going to assume that's $20,000. It's going straight into Dogecoin. Show love, Kyle the Hay. How many 9-volt batteries would I need to power a human-sized robot? You should ask Boston Dynamics. I have no idea. Your biological voltage isn't all that much. I think it's only is it millivolts? I don't think it's more than a few. It can't be more than a few volts, your biological electricity. So it wouldn't take that much. But if you want to power a human-sized robot, I don't think 9-volt batteries are going to do the job. You need something more efficiently compact, and that's probably why Boston Dynamics uses lithium ion and stuff like that. Flex tape with the 50, who just slapping this comment on me like some flex tape. Hey show, Kyle Love the. First time catching you live. Been watching you since you were in the void. What do you mean? Who's that? Star Wars is my favorite series ever since I was little, and my favorite villain will always be Darth Vader. Who is your favorite villain and why? I never liked Boba Fett. He's ineffective and bad at his job. I don't care what you think. He's not cool. Again, like I know that Return of the Jedi isn't the best Star Wars film. It just holds a special place in my heart. Seeing Darth Maul and Darth Maul fight for the first time also holds a special place in my heart because I was pretty young when the prequels came out, and that scene is the best scene in that movie. The Duel of Fates is the best song in maybe any of the Star Wars movies. And that fight scene was so rad. Fun fact, I am currently in the possession of a lightsaber that Ray Park, Darth Maul himself, has used twice in person on stage. And I own that. Do you know what Star Wars doesn't own, though? Number 2 on our list of things that Star Wars gets right and wrong in science. Asteroid. Hey, it looks like I'm sitting in the Millennium. Hey, oh, punch it. Asteroids. Egg Salad with the 10 says, Ree! Thanks for your money. It all goes towards making my own spaceship. No, mostly it goes towards paying people so that we make good stuff. Anyway, asteroids. Now, the top two things that Star Wars gets right or wrong are going to be what Star Wars gets wrong. And I've chosen to make it what it gets wrong because Star Wars is one of the most recognizable pop culture things in human history, right? And they could have got some sciencey things correct. And if they did that, we wouldn't have an issue. But because they didn't, again, it's a creative choice. It's not exactly their fault. But because they didn't get these things right, literally generations of people have misconceptions about some stuff in space and what some words mean. And that's annoying as a science communicator. Makes my life harder. One of those things is asteroid belts. Now, in Empire Strikes Back, they go through an asteroid belt or some other thing. They go through an asteroid belt, and C-3PO says, "Ugh," and Han Solo's like, "Ugh." And they make those fun noises because the movie depicts going through an asteroid belt as very dangerous and treacherous. The chances are 3,000 and whatever to 1, which is the opposite of how you should say Anyway, they make the traversal of an asteroid belt seem very treacherous. This is good from a narrative standpoint, and it introduces some tension and pressure for the characters and shows, how good Han Solo is and how, cocksure he is. But in reality, space, like choosing the correct, scale for the galaxy, the asteroid belts, as we know them to exist, are so big and so far apart that in a real asteroid belt, you'd be unlikely to see one asteroid next to another with your human eyes. They'd be so far apart in space that you could probably fit an entire planet in between two asteroids in an asteroid belt. And I'm pretty sure I'm correct on that. And we just know this is how space is. Space is so unbelievably enormous that things are never close together. In fact, when Woody says it's 3,721 to 1. Ooh. But space is so big, in fact, that when there's that scene of Han Solo calculating the jump to hyperspace, he says, "Oh, wait, kid, you can't just jump to hyperspace. You might end up inside a star, blah, 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 blah." I did the calculations on this once using the free mean path equations for gases colliding together. And space is so unbelievably empty that if you model space and the stars inside of that space like particles inside of a volume, Han Solo making a random jump to hyperspace in a truly random direction in the night sky, that he would be more likely to go to the edge of the universe and back over 100 times without issue than he would be to hit something. That's how big space is. You could go to the edge of the universe and back 100 times randomly and not hit a star, a planet, an asteroid, nothing. That's how big space is. And so, while I like the scale of Star Wars, it does not get the scale of space right. Which was also what would make Luke and Leia, even though they're twins, different ages, given how they travel faster than light and at light speed. You know what? Let's just get on. So I've been already talking for 40 minutes about Star Wars. What a life I lead. Clay the Bot with a 20 says, "Thank you for doing what you do. Put this towards getting the Basilisk a carbon fiber scale." I might pay for one scale. Carbon fiber is pretty bad. John Mendoza with the 50 says, "How fast would you be traveling to make traveling through an asteroid belt look as it does in Star Wars? Please advise." Well, yeah, I mean, you'd have to be traveling along the axis or around the circumference of the asteroid belt, right? To encounter as many asteroids as possible. And then you need to be moving many, many kilometers per second to encounter, oh, I don't know. That's a great question, actually. So that is a good, actually, you know what? That's a fantastic question because no one's ever thought about that. No nerds think about this. And now you and I are thinking about this for the first time because and I think every other nerd in the world has always assumed they're going through an asteroid belt like we see it depicted in the solar system, right? Like there's the sun and, the planets, and then there's an asteroid belt. And we imagine them going perpendicular to, like, as though they are the radius. We imagine that the asteroid belt is going like this, and they travel just across it. At least that's what I've always assumed. But as you say, if you were to travel along the circumference of some asteroid belt, you would encounter a lot of asteroids. If you were going as fast as a spaceship like the Millennium Falcon might be going, many kilometers, hundreds of kilometers, thousands of kilometers per second, which makes it much more perilous to traverse. And so, whether or not truly traversing an asteroid field is dangerous depends very much so on how you were traversing it. If he was trying to lose them in an asteroid field, you'd probably want to try to encounter as many as possible. Asteroid episode ? That's why I read chat. And the number one thing that I think Star Wars gets wrong, or right, is something that Star Wars gets wrong. And that's the parsec. Now, I don't want to hear nothing from you nerds saying, oh, it was just a way for Han Solo to boast that he can make the trip in a shorter amount of distance, and that's what the writers... No, it's not. What happened is that George Lucas heard a cool science word and he put it in the script without totally knowing what it meant. That's what happened. It wasn't a genius boast. It wasn't to get around a black hole that wasn't created yet in the canon. It wasn't none of that crap. They just got the science word wrong. And this is the number one thing that that Star Wars got right or wrong, because if you know one science thing about Star Wars, it's that the parsec is wrong. I bet every nerd who's seen any more than one Star Wars thing knows this or has heard about the parsec problem, that Star Wars gets the parsec thing wrong. I bet so many people on Earth know this. I bet more people know this than basic chemistry, So Star Wars has done more for the misunderstanding of a single word than maybe anything else that I can think of in history, right? It's done tremendous damage to the understanding of this because someone didn't check the script. Like, hey, what does that mean? Who cares? That's fine. Again, that's fine. But it makes my life harder. So this is the number one thing that science has ever gotten wrong. Star Wars, damn it. That Star Wars has ever gotten wrong, ever. Sorry that I swore, Alex. What is a parsec? A parsec is 3.26 light years. Why? Well, it is a shorthand way of measuring. Well, it's a way to condense the vast distances of space. How we condense that is defining a parsec as the distance at which you have the radius of Earth from the radius of the orbit of Earth from the sun, 1 AU, 93 million miles or something like that. The distance at which this radius traces out a 1 arcsecond angle. 1 arcsecond. 3,600th of a degree. 1 arcsecond with 1 AU. The distance, which you can calculate from simple trigonometry. X, we just call that 1 parsec. It is 3.26 light years, dependent on 1 arcsecond and how far Earth is from the sun, and we can use this to make the grand distances of space smaller by if you read astronomy papers or something like that, you might hear them say kiloparsecs, and that's just a way to reduce it by 1,000 and then a third. Just easier to talk about smaller distances, right? So that is the number one thing Star Wars has gotten wrong about this universe. But I want to hear what you have to say about it. Amarost with a 10 says, if there was some incident like in the O2 Time Machine movie where the moon broke into 3 chunks, would the Earth hold the parts together, or would it have a bad effect on how the Earth works? Well, when things break apart in space, it depends on how far they are ejected. If the moon is simply cracked apart, there's still enough mass there and gravity to bring it back together in a loose assembly. But if it's blown apart, some of the parts would fall to Earth. So it depends. William Bauer with the 20 says, hey, Kyle, on the Bob Ross episode, you made me wonder, how does a colorblind test work? Is it a surefire way to root out the most discrepancies in color difference between people, or is there a possibility that my blue could be your red? Well, the possibility that your blue is my red is pretty low. And I don't know how colorblind tests are perfected as scientific instruments. I don't know. But I would guess it's just differences between groups based on the difference of the instrument. But I'm not sure. I don't know. I'm not colorblind, as far as I know. Or am I? Ed Bangor says, how did we decide on the definition of an AU? Earth's orbit is parabolic, so it is the mean, medium, or minimum, or maximum distance. Am I the only one who cares? No, I think I'm just leaving something out, Ed. I think it's when the Earth is at its furthest from the sun. Oh no, it is the mean distance from the center of the Earth to the center of the sun. So it's the mean. Yes. Okay. Glad we sorted that out. Zach with the 6 says, best wishes, keep up the science. You know what? I can't not do it. Yeah, Colin Whitlock says, the parsec problem is like saying I beat a 5K race in 4K. Yeah, see, it doesn't make... Someone just got it wrong. That's fine. You can get things wrong. But don't try to... Don't come in here and be like, well, that's because Lando and him bet that he couldn't go around a black hole at a certain distance and blah, blah, blah. Then he frees robots in the Han Solo movie and it's terrible. Not the freeing robot part, the Han Solo movie. Ray Krieger says, will we ever see manned fighter jets with cockpits covered in cameras instead of glass? That's one thing that I didn't mention. I was thinking about it. That spaceships having windows is a structural liability. Because glass is very brittle. If it's not transparent aluminum or something like that. Glass is very brittle. So it poses a structural problem and a damage problem. But also, space, again, is so big that you needing to see something with your puny human eyes, you probably don't need to see anything, because you're not going to see anything. If space war is going to be waged at any kind of reasonable distance, then having sensors and computer models and computer graphics, that's going to be so much more useful than having a window. It might look pretty, and then having something like a 10 forward might make sense in the Enterprise. But again, most of space is nothing. You can quote me on that. So windows are at best useless and at most a liability. Moral Gray Area with a 10 says, my understanding of dark matter is that we have never interacted with it, but we rely on it to make equations about the universe work. There must be more evidence for scientists to adhere to a theory. Dark matter, as far as we know, doesn't interact with anything, but we've observed it indirectly. We've observed it indirectly by looking at galaxies and seeing how they spin, and it seems like galaxies are spinning too fast. That galaxies... So how fast something spins depends on how much mass is in the system, and you know this if you've ever like jumped on a merry-go-round or something like that and seen it speed up or slow down. You know that mass has something to do with the equation. And so when we look at these galaxies spinning at a certain velocity, there seems to be some missing mass. When we count up all the stars in that galaxy, how much mass should it have? It shouldn't be spinning at the speed that it is. That's why we infer that there must be some matter that we can't see, making it spin the way it does, and we call this dark matter. But I don't think we rely on it to make equations about the universe work. We have no idea what it is. And you know what? Let's all cool down a bit, because I gotta take a quick commercial break here, and we'll be right back with more of your comments, questions, and opinions. Oh, hello, Post Malone. Yeah, how you doing, brother? Yeah, good. No, I told them that I'm not accepting any questions whatsoever. Yeah, no, I'm never going to tell them while we're hanging out. Oh, I might see you tomorrow? That's cool. Oh, no, yeah, just what you were talking about. So before, I just want to hit you something, all right? Let me hit you with something, Posty. Okay, check this out. Just be really honest with me if you hate it, okay? Okay. I'm doing science now. I'll be the Thorbard now, though. Posty? Anyway. If you could hear the sun, how loud would it be? Someone did that calculation. So if there was a regular Earth atmosphere at our pressure and temperature that we experience on the surface of the planet, if that was going all the 93 million miles to the sun would sound about as loud as a jackhammer on Earth. So that should give you an idea. That should give you an idea of just... And if we haven't banned that guy, definitely ban that guy. Just think of how unbelievably cacophonous the sun must be for it to still be as loud as a jackhammer 93 million miles away. It would kill you just with the sound. Zachary Rusty Elliott says, hey, First I'm reading hate messages, and now I'm reading messages that aren't even messing with my brain. Show Kyle, love the hay. Would you be willing to do one of these good or bad science things about Futurama? Sure. Tam, one of my biggest professor supporters, with the 50, says, how can you tell if a scientific paper is legit or flawed fake when you're not familiar with the subject? That's a hard question, Tam. If you're not an expert in the field, interpreting a scientific paper is going to be tough. But a couple of things you want to look for. The reputability of the journal is one. You might not know that, but you will be able to tell the difference between a journal like Science and a journal that is not peer-reviewed or doesn't have many papers published in it. Another, if you want to look at the paper itself, you want to look at its power. So how many people is it looking at? What's the N? How many people is it actually surveying? and how many other papers cite this paper is another indication whether or not it's used in the literature or not. And you can always email another scientist in the field or in that journal about it, and that will give you some kind of insight. But unless you're unless you have someone that is interpreting it in context, it's very hard to do yourself. It's just the honest part of the situation. XBob42 said, "Oh, my super chat went away. Oh, well, here, Bob, this one's for you." Cheech Ola with the Australian $31, as usual, says, "G'day, Kyle. I keep seeing sodium pentothal in movies and TV. Is truth serum a real thing? Seems strange for a chemical to be able to induce honesty. What's up with that? Cheers, you absolute legend. Unlimited power." I don't think sodium pentothal is a real truth serum. I know there's like pain serums. Don't ask me how I know that. But a lot of stuff that movies and TV... Chris, you gotta stop. A lot of stuff in movies and TV, especially crime shows and whatnot, are exaggerated or just used to effect. If I was doing a what's good or bad about like CSI, like polygraph tests are not accurate. They don't actually show, they do have your biometrics, but those biometrics are at best are indirect measurements of emotion and not even necessarily lying. Polygraphs don't work. What they do is they're still used by investigators to make you nervous and make you think that they can read your thoughts, and then you might confess anyway. You know who knows that? Chris Sparks with the $500 donation, which is what, 4 or 5 weeks in a row. Chris, you are an absolute madman. And that donation is what is going to give me the courage to go and edit out the part of the video where I totally messed up by reading a comment. So thanks, Chris, for keeping this place filled with justice. Robert Turpin with the 10. Just a couple more minutes. I know we didn't get to many topics today, but that's because we talked for 45 minutes about Star Wars, which is exactly how I want to spend my day today. With the 10 says, "Kyle Show, love the hay." Stop it. Do you think geothermal energy could be a profitable field to go in, and any advancements in tech possible? Also, what conditioner do you use? I use a TV show conditioner from my salon. I don't know if they sell it at your salon, but it's called TV Show. I use it along with a shampoo, and I use one and only argan oil. Sponsor me. And yes, I do go to a salon because I'm a fancy boy. And when you got fancy hair, be a fancy boy. I have no idea about geothermal energy. I don't know how feasible it is to scale up because of the drilling that's required. I know some countries use it, Netherlands, Norway, that are close to sources of geothermal energy, but I don't know if you can do it just anywhere. I think offshore wind and solar are much more viable, but I'm not up enough on the technology to give you a good answer. I do have a degree in environmental engineering, but so you'd think I'd have a good answer. You'd think that, and you'd be wrong. We have Richard Palagayo with the 50, who says, quote, "You will find that many of the truths we cling to depend greatly on our own point of view." Obi-Wan Kenobi. A certain point of view? Yes. He was just, you know, recapitulating Einstein in that moment, right? Turns out that many things in the universe depend on your point of view. The universe itself depends on what reference frame you're looking through at it, from which inertia. Thank you so much for joining me this week on Office Hours. Hey, we had quite a ride. We went through our top 10 list, things that Star Wars got right and wrong. I said number 10, size of the galaxy. We talked about clones, ion engines, asteroid belts, weird ship shapes, aliens, laser swords, and the number one thing that I think Star Wars gets wrong, and it makes my life fun, is parsec. I want you all, okay, everyone in the chat, all you in the chat, I want you to remember, what is a parsec? It's you can round up, 3.3 light years. Bam. Now you know. Based on the orbit of the Earth, an angle it makes with 1 arc second, it's parsec, 3.3 light years. You all know now, and whenever someone brings it up, I want you to stop what you're doing and say, hey, I know what that is. Okay? That's your homework. Remember what a parsec is. And while you're remembering what a parsec is, if you want to continue on this conversation with me at the facility, within these hollowed walls, you can go to patreon.com/Kyle Hill to get behind-the-scenes photos, videos early. This week, we have a new Half-Life Histories, which is going to be my longest ever. It's going to be almost TV show length. It's going to be like 24, 25 minutes. It's interesting, gruesome at times, fascinating at other times, somber, happy, all the emotions that you want. And you can join me in Discord if you support me and ARIA just enough. And I can't wait to see you there if you do join me. I hope you have a wonderful Star Wars Day. Hope you have a more wonderful Revenge of the Fifth if you're of Sith orientation. And I hope that if you celebrate, you have a wonderful Cinco de Mayo as well. I will see you next week. And next week, I don't know if we're going to do it next week. Platinum Phoenix, GG's hippie. I always love that you're here. Oh, God. We might be starting up our Twitch streams with our video games pretty soon. Sci-fi video games. Kind of like what we've been doing here with Star Wars. Good, bad, commentary, gameplay. Oh, yeah, that's right. We're expanding into areas that no science communicator has ever expanded into before, so I'm very excited about that. Join me very soon. You'll see it on all the facility stuff and my socials and all whatnot. Have a wonderful rest of your week. And, I'm not laughing for any reason. Have a wonderful rest of your week and be nice to each other. Because I think if nothing else were to happen right now, you know, be nice to each other. Because this is all we get. Surprise!